Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Fireside Chat number 63. I'm joined by a special guest, one of my favorite journalists, one of the last ones, I think. She is a senior political columnist for The Observer, a reporter at Real Clear Investigations, and a senior contributor to The Federalist. I hope I got all those things right. Welcome to the show, Ashe Schow.
Hey, thanks for having me back.
All right. It's good to have you back. So, I want to get right into this, and I want to talk about a couple of the articles that you've written because they're very, very timely. One, I want to start with there's a great article that you put together. I'm going to bring it up on my screen so I can look at it. It was about Politico's reporting on Betsy DeVos and campus sexual assault. And so, for folks who don't know, could you tell us who is Betsy DeVos and why this might be important?
Betsy DeVos is the U.S. Secretary of the Department of Education under the Trump administration. She was prior to this, out in Michigan mainly, a advocate for school choice.
Mm-hmm.
And that's probably the main reason why she got the job. But since she's been in there, she has been at least looking into fixing the problems on college campuses that come up from the Title IX, everybody accusing everybody of sexual assault and everybody believing that men are rapists and women are all victims, and hopefully trying to get a handle on that culture.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, what in Politico wrote an article, and you essentially I guess we call it like you fact checked them in your own article.
Yeah, so the Politico article, this was actually back in January. Betsy DeVos was, and then this particular article I wrote in January, but over the past couple of weeks, this issue has come up again, where they're basically saying anyone who makes an accusation of sexual assault is automatically a victim. Like no trial necessary, and therefore, if you're already a victim, then you're telling the truth. So why would anybody need due process? Because
Correct.
they're all obviously guilty. And so the Political article back in January was doing this as well. But I think, what was it? The very first sentence was Education Secretary pick Betsy DeVos has given thousands of dollars to an advocacy group that wants to raise the burden of proof for campus sexual assault victims, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like the bias was just right there. And like what they're really saying is that she gave money to the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education, which she probably wasn't giving them money for due process. At the least, she was probably giving them money for free speech. She gave them, I think, like $10,000, which for her really isn't that much. It was years ago. It's not like it's an ongoing thing even.
Right.
And it was basically like, let's now start smearing fire, even though fire is very big into these issues, no matter what side of the aisle you are. They don't care whether you're left or right. They find themselves having to defend conservatives a lot more because conservatives are the ones that get attacked the most on these issues.
Sure.
When it comes to free speech. But on due process, it doesn't matter where your leanings are. Actually, a lot of the guys that get accused, I keep reading about, they were like raised by feminist parents. Like they know how they're supposed to treat a woman, but it doesn't matter. Like if you upset someone, you don't date her, she regrets it afterwards because you both were drunk, you're gonna get accused. Like it's such a terrible culture right now, and you've got all of these people on campus that are just feeding into it, these administrators that are making women who are not actually victims of sexual assault feel like they're victims of sexual assault, which I think is the cruelest thing to do to somebody. Like it is absolutely monstrous to tell somebody who's not a victim of a horrific crime that they're a victim of a horrific crime, and that they should basically have all the PTSD and trauma that goes along with it. I think that's awful.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad that you mentioned that fire is mostly, I think the bulk of their focus is, looking out for students' rights, no matter what their political affiliation. It's irrelevant. And also they're really big on free speech, which happens to be one of the largest, if not the largest issue facing campuses today. So,
Absolutely.
if affiliating because I think what's happening too at Politico in a way, I just thought about this. They're kind of lumping in people who are free speech advocates with right-wingers because it so happens that people on the right tend to be more adamant in fighting for free speech because they tend to find themselves in positions where they need to. and then the fire, because, and this is just a principle, it's not really a political viewpoint. I mean, opening up the floodgates, as it were, for more speech doesn't really have a political leaning unless you're the kind of person that doesn't want to hear opposing views or doesn't want to hear from certain people. So
Right.
I think it gets lumped in, but that's not really what it's about.
Right, but that's also what's kind of going on currently in the past couple of weeks with Betsy DeVos, where she met with the stakeholders in these campus sexual assault issues. So she met with victims advocates, which is an important group. All right, actual victims need to be taken care of, and if a woman makes an accusation, I mean, there should be groups that take her seriously, you know, like for her own good, just in case, right? Like the support groups and whatever. I don't want support groups to be like, well, we need to fact check you before we let you into our group.
Sure.
I don't think they lose anything if someone is lying. They're still giving somebody whatever, you know, they need.
Yeah, right. If they
a
need,
place
like,
to talk.
yeah,
but
like somebody to
when
talk
it comes
to
to
or whatever.
administrations, they can't act like that because they can't just automatically assume someone's telling the truth when it comes to punishing another student who also has a right to an education free from harassment and being called a rapist without any kind of due process. So what happened in the past couple of weeks was, you know, about 2 weeks ago, Betsy DeVos met with the victims advocacy groups. She also met with some falsely accused students and then some attorneys and some Title IX administrators. And so there was protests like, how dare you listen to these accused rapists type deal going on, and you know, basically assuming that all of these people were liars and that they were actually rapists because, you know, no one would ever lie about this. But if you're accused, then you definitely lie. I mean,
Yeah.
their basic argument boils down to anybody who is pro due process is pro crime, pro heinous crime. Because anytime you suggest that somebody who is accused of rape, which is an awful, awful thing to be accused of, deserves due process to make sure that they actually are that awful person and not mistaken, you get accused of being pro rape. As if being pro due process is pro rape. Like, it makes no sense, but this is where we are in society, at least when it comes to college campuses. Yeah. And so DeVos was getting attacked on that as well. And it's absolutely absurd that this was allowed to fly. Yeah. That you have people that are essentially saying due process is an impediment to justice and college campuses don't need it. Because if college campuses don't need it, why does the criminal justice system need it? You've got people like Jill Brain who says, well, you're not being put in jail. Okay, but you're still getting the label attached to you. You're still having your future upended, well, as if you had been in jail. You know, like if you're applying to grad schools or another school, it's basically a check the box situation where they look into your transcript to find, have you ever been disciplined for anything or accused of anything? So if we're going to be doing that to people, then we absolutely have to give them protections, legitimate protections. And what's happening now is even in schools where students allegedly have protections, everything they present is just thrown away. So they present a long, months-long message stream between them and the girl where she's saying, these are the things I want to do to you, and I can't wait to see you, and I love you so much, and I like you, and blah, blah, blah. And then she accuses him. He's like, it was consensual. Like, look at how we had been talking. Like, this is like even that night, and then look how she was reacting to me afterwards. Everything was the same until she realized I didn't want to date her. They're like, none of that matters. What only happens is what happened in that exact room. And it's like, this is context. This is evidence. Like, if she acted this way before and after, and then, but you're saying that one moment in the middle is all we need to listen to, and neither of them have evidence either way, so we're just going to take what she says as evidence. Like, it's absurd. It's absolutely absurd, but this is what's happening. If a man actually puts in, like, actual evidence of her afterwards, like the Amherst case, like her afterwards admitting it was consensual and that he couldn't lie about it and all the bad things that were going to happen to her, yet that's not evidence because, that happened afterwards. We only care about what happened during. Or you've got, kids that bring in, her friends that say she totally made it up and she admitted to me, and they just don't talk to the friend. Like, they just do everything they can to make sure that they get this guy so that they can go to the Department of Education under the rules that were set up under the Obama administration and the culture that was set up under the Obama administration, and say, look how seriously we take it. We just expelled that guy.
Yeah.
And they don't look into the details. All they really care about is like, yep, you're expelling people who are accused. That means you're doing the right thing. That's all
Yeah.
they cared about.
Yes, yes. That's why when they released, there was a statistic that I think it was like 90% of I forgot what it was. There were a really low percentage of reported rapes, right? And there were people disappointed in it. Well, yeah, that's right. The AAUW, which
Yeah.
is
The American Association for University Women.
Yes, that's right. They were disgusted that 91% of colleges reported 0 rapes in 2014. So
Yeah.
that means that they're basically saying, because they staunchly believe in the 1 in 4, if the number is lower, then someone must be either being intimidated out of confessing anything, or there's something going on, women are being silenced, or men are getting away with it, or Stockholm syndrome or something. It can't
Right.
be that the numbers are actually just lower.
Right, exactly. I think there was this funny cartoon a few years ago that was like, someone doing research in the hard sciences, and it's like, oh, well, my research didn't line up with my hypothesis. My hypothesis is wrong. And then there's, research in the soft sciences is like, oh, the evidence didn't line up with my hypothesis. The evidence is wrong. Like it's always like my hypothesis and what I truly just believe, my narrative is correct. And so anything that goes against that is wrong.
Yeah.
Or something. And you just see that time and time again, where it's just impossible to believe when you've got these schools that are basically begging girls to make reports so that they can look tough on this issue. When you've got a culture that's saying, we believe you, and we're going to get him for you. And you've got, that back when Biden was VP, going out all the time talking about this issue, for it to still be that women are afraid to come forward, when it's like every
Right.
little thing a woman says now is like sexual assault.
Mm-hmm.
Now, part of it, I would believe some women are afraid to come forward and just say anything to anybody because they actually don't think it's sexual assault, and are afraid that the campus, will sweep them up and then they get stuck into it, which has happened before. I mean, some of these cases you read, the guys aren't even really mad at the girls. They think that the girl was upset as he didn't want to date her, or maybe it was uncomfortable that night, or, she just regretted it because they were both kind of drunk. And then she just goes to talk to someone about it. And now all of a sudden they're like, that was sexual assault. You need to report it and get it. And now she's swept up in it and she can't really stop it. There have been a couple cases where girls have kind of tried to stop it.
Yeah.
Or been
Sure.
upset with the consequences that the guy faced, because they're like, it really wasn't that big a deal. It's like sometimes they just want to talk to somebody about their feelings, and they're getting swept up into this.
Yeah, actually, I think I did a story on one of those where, essentially a girl made an accusation, and it was partly to get back at him because, he didn't call the next day or something. It was really, really petty. And it snowballed into this big thing that, once the school took over and the kangaroo courts and everything, and she couldn't stop it. And it was like, she, and she wanted to, but I guess it was a really hard lesson that she learned about, when to use these sort of authoritative institutions to get back at people, because you could really hurt somebody. And also, to comment on what you said before, that other woman said, hey, well, he's not going to prison, it's not that serious. The problem is that when a person is accused of rape, and especially men, because they're also, it happens to them more often, and we tend to be less sympathetic. They don't have to go to prison to have their life ruined. The accusation is often enough. They will have a hard time finding other colleges to go to, getting scholarships, getting work. There is also vigilante justice. I know that, for example, with the Brock Turner case, while he was the courts and the law had basically decided what was what, there were people outside of his house where he was essentially serving his time. I think it was like a house arrest thing, that were waiting with guns, So there are people that will enact vigilante justice, and that's something else that you have to consider. There are people who will, if they learn, even if you go to prison, you could get killed there because, the inmates don't like rapists. And if you go to prison and you're innocent, you could die in there. Like there are consequences beyond, oh, well, at least he's not going to prison. I mean, it's not as simple as that. So
No, it absolutely isn't. I mean, you just see this all the time, and I just don't understand how we got to a point in our society where it's just okay to make an accusation and not have to have any evidence, and that, evidence to the contrary is completely ignored, and that due process is just viewed as this terrible thing that gets in the way. I mean, like, we start going down that route. I mean, it's back to mob justice, which we already kind of have with social media, but it's just terrifying that this is like what they want, and that if you dare suggest anything otherwise, then you like hate rape survivors. I don't.
Right.
I think rape survivors are incredibly strong and going through a whole lot of stuff. I don't want anybody to diminish what real survivors and real victims are going through by pretending to be one. Because that's why people tend not to believe it so often, is that it is so easy for a woman to make an accusation. And nothing happens to her. No. I mean, like you talked about the woman you wrote about, it was in her own head where the consequences occurred. Nothing, the school didn't do anything to her. The school doesn't do anything to these students who do, blatantly make false accusations. The police department hardly ever do anything to women who make blatantly false rape accusations. I think there was a woman who's just now about to get maybe 2 years, which is probably just going to be, time served really quick, or probation, like or something, community service. Like there's nothing. And so we're also at the same time, while we're creating this culture where like everything is sexual assault, so you should make an accusation. We're creating this culture where it's just perfectly okay for women to just get back at a man if she's mad at him by making this accusation, because they're not aware of the kinds of consequences that it has on someone else's life. It's just, oh, you're mad, so you say something mean about someone. Well, this is, oh, you're mad, so you say something mean about someone to an authority that it can actually hurt him. And they just have no idea that there's any kind of consequences behind that. They don't care. They just want to get back at him. And I think that is a really horrific thing to be teaching young women.
Absolutely. And also, we have laws and due process for a reason. These are not meant to be used as weapons of somebody's like personal vendetta, or the fact that they're embittered because this guy pumped and dumped them or whatever. I mean, it's a shitty thing to do, but when you're using essentially administrative and institutional power to get back at him, that's not what that's for. That's not what it's for. And you're right, it does take away from victims of real sexual assault and real rape when there's so many people that are willing to use the system just to do shit like this, or because they're really confused about what it means. And the fact that we get so upset at actual, rapists, or even people who are simply accused, we get really angry. Most people don't even, if they hear that someone's been accused, they pretty much assume that it's most likely true. Most people tend to believe the victim when she says this is what happened. That's evidence enough that this whole idea that we live in a rape culture is ridiculous, because nobody is okay with that. Everyone is disgusted by it, and that's the opposite of what that is. In fact, I would say that this is definitely a culture that probably over punishes, in that we tend to penalize and victimize and punish people who are innocent because we don't want to take a chance that they might be guilty. So we just go ahead and punish them anyway. At least that's the people who are okay with us.
Through the charges, through
the preponderance of evidence model that they use.
Sometimes a punishment in itself. But in college campuses specifically, they would rather punish. In the criminal justice system, it's supposed to bend the other way, but we all know instances where it's gone horribly wrong, where a girl made an accusation and they got her on false charges, but it wasn't false. It ended up not being false. I think there was a big story, like a Pulitzer winning story like last year or the year before, where that happened. So there's instances like that. There's also obviously instances of false accusations. And there's obviously tons and tons of everything in between where no one can know what really happened. You know, because it's just he said, she said, and usually on that you tend to err in the side of not claiming someone's a rapist when you just can't be sure. But on college campuses, you know, just go for it. And what they're doing on college campuses, in order to say that they take this seriously, is broadening the definition of what sexual assault is, which doesn't even help victims of actual sexual assault. Because if you're like, if there were a sexual assault problem, broadening the definition to make more things fall into the category isn't going to stop the original definition from happening. You're just going to make more people fall under that definition, right? So if sexual assault is actually, you know, very basic as someone holding you down against, like, this is, you know, obviously there are other ways to do this, but holding you down, forcibly forcing you into sex, right? If that were the singular definition, then broadening that definition to be like, well, he didn't, you know, well, he kissed you without permission. It doesn't stop a person from actually forcibly holding someone down. That just makes a guy who made a bad move, on, like by trying to kiss a woman he thought was interested in him, that makes him in the same league as the guy who holds someone down. And that's just not the case. But that's what's happening on college campuses. It's basically like trying to fight, you know, the opioid epidemic by making Tylenol illegal. It's not going to stop people from using opioids. It's just going to make Tylenol users now labeled as drug users. Like it's not actually going to stop an original problem.
Yeah, you're going to criminalize Tylenol users, basically.
Right.
Pretty ridiculous. Let me ask you a question about Betsy DeVos. We did a show about her because she seemed to take a lot of issues with things like Title IX and the Dear Colleague letter. Like, she's very involved with that, and we're really hopeful that gets overturned or changed or something. Title IX has created lots and lots of problems, and I know you've written about it a lot. Do you have any? Do you think that she could, or she has an interest in changing that? I don't know if you've been paying attention to what she's.
It seems like it. Candace Jackson, from what she has said. She's the current acting head of the Office for Civil Rights, which is the part of the Education Department which put out the Dear Colleague letter back in 2011 and has been enforcing all of this madness. Candace Jackson is in charge. She's made public comments, as has another Education Department lawyer, making comments that, you know, it's on the table to rescind this. And even if they're not going to fully rescind it, adding, you know, you can't act this way. You have to add due process, and you have to, like, be sure that someone is actually a rapist before you start going around ruining his life and labeling him as one. Yeah. You know, I would be happy just to start with that. Just to start. These are the minimum protections you need to include for this, and this evidence has to be included. This whole, well, we get to decide what's relevant. Well, they're deciding, when they decide what's relevant, they just push out anything that a guy adds. You know, like if he wants to ask a question that's like, well, you said this, but then you did this. Can you explain the discrepancy here? And they're like, nope, that's not a relevant question. It's like, you kidding me? You know, they're like, you said you were too drunk. So, I mean, but all your friends say you only had like a glass of wine. How are you too drunk? That's not relevant. It's just like, like, they're asking relevant questions. They're being told it's not relevant. I mean, I've seen some of the questions these guys have tried to ask.
Jesus
and it's
Christ.
Like, and I get thrown out, and it's just like, are you kidding me?
It's got to
like,
be crazy frustrating.
Right, and it's just like, well, we decide what's relevant, and we don't think this is relevant. It's
What?
like, oh, the text messages before and after, not relevant.
Yeah.
You know, his own drunken level, not relevant. The fact that he's drunker than her, not relevant. Like, it's just absurd what they end up throwing out. Mm-hmm. Or, you know, not allowing her friends who say, yeah, she totally made this up, to testify, not relevant. You know, all of that stuff. Or, you know, like, there has to be some sort of, like, check on this to say, hey, no, this is what's relevant. Yeah. These things are relevant, and you need to include them. And you can't be interrupting the accused while letting the accuser speak freely. You can't be, you know, denying him an ability to cross-examine and ask questions. You can do it in a way that, you know, if you're erring on the side of caution, that, she doesn't have to be in the room or something, but he writes down the questions and they ask, but they have to ask them, and that you have to give him a chance to speak and defend himself. You can't stack the deck, and you've got to have some minimum basic protections.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one last thing I would say before we move on to the next story that you wrote. If somehow Betsy is to overturn Title IX or change it in some way that is not puts us in a position where this sort of stuff isn't happening, and that when something happens on college campuses that is criminal, that we actually use our criminal justice system to deal with it rather than our college courts, which are not fit to deal with that shit. I will say that it was worth electing Trump for that one thing. For just that, it would be worth it. Whatever else doesn't happen, I don't care. But if that is taken care of, I will be grateful, because it has the potential to destroy too many people's lives, especially.
It already has.
Yes, and it already has, and especially men. And so, if that's the only thing they do, then I'll be on cloud nine.
Yeah, this absolutely can't continue, because like the military was the first testing ground for this. So you have all these military cases of false accusations so that women can get, deployed somewhere else, or just don't want to see a guy that they slept with. So that was like really the testing ground. Now it's moved on to college campuses. So what's next? I mean, you've got the American Law Institute that was already for years trying to get affirmative consent into the law for the rest of us, for the general population. It's been failing. It's been a big battle there, but they're still trying. So what happens next? It starts coming into the court for non-college students, and then everybody in America who has ever had sex overnight is both a victim and a rapist, because affirmative consent doesn't work in the real world, and it's no one has ever had sex that way.
Yeah.
Completely. And be able to prove it beyond a shadow of a doubt, or even a preponderance of evidence. So there's no way it can work for the general population, but that would be the next thing. And so if we go down this route where certain crimes don't need due process, then we're upending our entire criminal justice system, and it's just mob rule, pitchforks and gavels.
It's the witch hunt.
It's horrifying.
Yeah, because
horrifying to think about the logical conclusion of all of this.
Yeah, because we're in a place now where essentially people accused of rape are not put in the position where the accuser and the prosecution has to prove him guilty. He has to prove himself innocent. And
on college campuses.
On college campuses, yes. And that is not the way this works. That's essentially a witch hunt. That's like, asking people to prove a negative.
A negative is basically impossible. That's why you get all these statistics that say only 2 to 10% of rape accusations are false. The actual statistic is that 2 to 10% are proven false, pretty much beyond the same shadow of a doubt. It's on a scale. So there's proven false, there's unfounded, there's like miscategorized, there's unsure, and then at the very end, there's guys who made it to trial but were found not guilty, and then there's a very small percentage that they were found guilty and they went to jail. So if you were to take that same scale and say, okay, well, 2 to 10% are proven false because shadow of a doubt that way, you have to go to the other side of the scale and say then only 2 to 5% are proven true, because that's the number that go to jail. There's this whole thing in the middle of like where you just don't know one way or the other. Saying 2 to 10% is false doesn't actually make 98% true.
Right.
Because it's a labeling thing, but nobody picks up on that. People don't report it correctly. They just want to say 2 to 10% are lying. And at the same time, even if that were the absolute truth, which I don't believe it is, if you're creating a culture where you're just believed, then that number is going to move, because people will take advantage of the system, and people have been already. And at the same time, if that 2 to 10% were absolutely set in stone, it still doesn't matter on a college campus, because you still don't know where the guy falls. Even if it's super likely that he falls in the 90 to 98%, you still have to prove that. You still have to make sure that he's not in that small group.
Yeah.
You can't just assume that he's in the larger group. This isn't, it's college campuses. It's pretty sad that there's people who don't know how statistics work.
Right. All right. So let's go on and move on to the next story. So this was another article that you wrote about Crash Override Network. This is an older article, but I think that it's still important where we're seeing like a lot of this stuff going on online and also in the wake of what happened at VidCon. Not entirely relevant, but somewhat. So for those of you guys who might be new to Honey Badger Radio, maybe new to all of this entire discussion that's going on, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Crash Override Network. What is Crash Override Network? Crash Override is a crisis helpline, advocacy group, and resource center for people who are experiencing online abuse. We are a network of experts and survivors who work directly with victims, tech companies, lawmakers, media, security experts, and law enforcement to educate and provide direct assistance, working to eliminate the causes of online abuse. Now, that is how it is described on Crash Override's website. However, that's not really everything about Crash, as Ashe wrote an article in 2016 called "When the Harassed Become the Harassers," and it's about Crash Override Network. So I will let you say a few things about that, Ashe. So what did you find?
Well, I mean, this was basically one of those situations where some of the people that were involved in Crash Override Network behind the scenes had an internal chat log going, and they were using the same tactics that they claim to be against. So they claim that they're against doxing, right? Using putting out a person's private contact information, publishing it online in order to intimidate them, in order to get a lot of people to harass them or maybe show up their door or maybe even hurt them. They claim to be against that. And yet in these internal chat logs, you found some of the people who are with Crash Override Network advocating for that very thing, or trying to, whip up mobs against people that they feel were against them. And honestly, for some of these people, I could see how it happened, where if you get some legitimate attacks on you, you start almost seeing everything as an attack. And so what I think happened with a lot of the people on Crash Override is that they started just seeing any type of criticism as being part of the group that would harass or and just any criticism.
It turned really tribal, and essentially, right? And
right,
because
exactly.
I actually had Ian Miles Chong on a while back, and this was right after the leaks of these sort of chat logs came out, and we talked at length about it. And what seemed to have happened was, over time, these people who were already pretty angry and bitter about, stuff that was going on, and it was like the reason why they started it all, they were so cloistered in their echo chamber that it actually became a place that really strongly reinforced their beliefs. And so they saw their in-group as, they couldn't do any wrong. Everything that they got, from them had to support their ideas. And anybody not in that group, especially people who were, either vocally critical or even questioned them, or moderates or whatever, they were the out group. They needed to be attacked. They were the enemy. And so this sort of like,
if you're not with us, you're against us.
Yes.
Yeah. And a lot of it, some of these people have a victim mentality. They got some fame by being a victim and, wanting to keep it going, right? Because when people stop paying attention to you, you have to be a victim again, because that's the only reason people were paying attention to them in the first place.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm glad you had Ian on, because he has been so great at all of this stuff. Because didn't he used to like kind of be on the other side,
he was,
right? He's in some of these chat logs.
Yeah, he was in those chat logs. He actually was very, and this is the thing about this kind of, in-group, out-group, tribalistic thinking that happens. When he got out of it, he actually looked back at all the stuff that he said, and he was like, I can't believe that I used to think this way. Like, what was I going through? What was I thinking about? What state was I in? And it's almost like I guess I can only relate it because I've never been like that per se, but I can relate it to, have you ever like looked back on something you did as a young person, maybe as a teenager
God,
or whatever,
everything.
and then you
It's the
said,
things that you lie awake at night and it's like,
yeah,
oh,
and you're
good,
like,
time to go to
God.
sleep. It's like, hey, remember that time when you were 9 years old?
Yeah, right. It's like that where you remember you doing something and it was so dumb and you're like, why did I do that? Or you really, I don't know, made a fool of yourself in
Some of us
public.
still
And
do those things. Some of
yeah.
us look at last year and are like, why did I do that?
Yeah,
No.
yeah, exactly. And I mean, I do some to a degree too. I think about, well, why was I so, I don't know, socially awkward, like in my late teens. It's
Yeah,
one
you're
when
hanging out with someone and you walk away and it's like the littlest of faux pas. Like one of the ones, and I'm just going to throw it out here because we're
okay,
talking about it. One of my first weeks working for Real Claire, like I went to the bathroom and when I was about to come in, someone was coming out of the door and she like was kind of holding the door open for me, but it was pretty narrow. And so like I went in and then like to this day, still in me being like, that was so, I should have let her out first, And it's one of those things that's like stuck in your mind because it was like, that seemed so rude to be like, no,
yeah,
I'm going to come in when you need to get out. Now you're holding the door open. And I know it's just like a big awkward thing, but it's like, it's still on my mind every
yeah.
time I see her.
Yeah, no, I get that. I've been there where this is a little bit of a tangent, but where someone says something to you. I remember once, not long ago, I was at this great grocery store I like to go to called Trader Joe's here in Chicago.
We've got it
And
here.
oh, you guys got it there, so you know about it, yeah. So, and I'm like walking out of the Trader Joe's into the parking lot. There was no, we were on an elevator, and there, it was one of those that travels a very short distance, like one floor. So we're going up the elevator, and a woman is on there, and she's talking about the elevator and how it used to be. I don't know why, but she's making conversation. And after it's over, I'm leaving the elevator, and I felt like I had to say something to her. Now, normally you would just say, okay, you have a good day. Normally I would have said that, but for some reason I said thank you. I don't know why I said that.
Right?
And to this day, I mean, this wasn't that long ago, but occasionally I think back on that. I was like, why did I say that? It's this weird, it's little things. You might say
Yeah.
something to your waiter or to a person who takes your ticket at theater, and they say,
Right.
enjoy the movie, and you say, you too, and then you go, what the fuck? You're not going to watch the movie?
I am so good about not doing that anymore because I've like focused on it for years. I'm always just
Yeah.
like, thanks, and then keep walking. Like, got it.
It's great.
Every time I do it, I'm like, I did it. Yes, I powered through.
Yeah.
Like weird little accomplishment. It's like I did not just say something awkward.
I'm
to
usually
somebody who I'll never
yeah.
see again.
I'm usually really good about that, but occasionally it'll slip out. And I'll be like, you also enjoy the movie too, my friend, even though you work here and you've probably seen it 10 times.
Yeah.
But
All right,
back to what we were
really
talking about.
about.
Yeah. So a couple of the people that Crash Overnight Ride Network had actually gone after, and I mean, they try to like take away people's jobs and all that. And Ian he participated in that, and he, like, from what I understand, he really regrets it. So some examples. There was a guy who actually got a Purple Heart. He was a veteran, and they came after. They wanted to come after him through his superior officer. That was one of your examples that you gave. Let me see if I can find it here in the article. I apologize. Let's see. Doxing. Yeah, right. For example, the group discussed trying to contact the superior officer of a Purple Heart recipient who had expressed support of Gamergate to try to silence him. They also contacted Google in an attempt to get Justine Tunney, who I believe she's a game developer, and she was also a very big organizer of Occupy Wall Street. So politically not different from these people, like at least not very far off. But they came after her too because she was able to somehow, I guess this is something they could not understand how it worked, she was able to be in support of Occupy Wall Street and Gamergate at the same time. So they actually tried to ruin her life. And this is actually very common, which is ironic considering that it is Crash Override Network, and supposedly that's their mission statement, is to be against that stuff.
Yeah, and they do it when, like they're only mad when it happens to them. They think seem to think it's a perfectly fine tactic to use against other people. I mean, you see that all the time. on the kind of issues that we deal with. You've got the people that play victim and say, oh my God, this is happening to me, and then turn right around and do the same thing to somebody else while trying to maintain some moral high ground. I mean, you had what I reported back then when Randy Harper was confronted with this. She wrote on Twitter, quote, fact, when people are under abuse for an extended period of time, that trauma can modify their behavior and make them imitate their abuser. She's basically saying that, like, you know, these internet meanies it's Stockholm syndrome.
Yeah, it's okay that they
like them.
Right. It's
and
okay
like,
that they respond this way because this is
right.
what other people are doing to them, even though it's I don't know that there was much in the way of evidence that Gamergate was doing. I mean, yes, there were trolls or there were people that were unaffiliated. Perhaps there were some people that used the hashtag.
It's also not like, because they were perceiving these people against them, whether these people had done anything to them or not. It's kind of like, you know, in a domestic abuse situation, like, oh, he hit me, so it's okay if I hit this other person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's true. That's a good way to put it. It's not even like going back at the person who is abusing you. You're just abusing whoever else because you have, well, it comes from again, it's like an in-group, out-group thing. It's like a collectivist thinking. If I go after someone in the collective, I've hurt somewhere along the way the person who hurt me. That's within that same collective. So, it's like squishing another bee because some bee stung you. So, yeah. All right. Anyway, there was, what else we got here? Actually, there wasn't much else to the story, but I thought it was worth bringing up because of, you know, the irony of the way that Khan worked. And I also like that it's actually Khan, because that's how it feels.
Is it still a thing? Like, I haven't heard anything.
They are. They still take donations. I was on their website. It's still there. So I don't know that. Basically, it's a resource center, and they just have a bunch of links to other things if you need help. It's founded by Zoe Quinn, I believe. But one of the large sponsors they have is Feminist Frequency, which is operated by Anita Sarkeesian. This is for those of you guys who are watching that may not know. So Anita is funding Crash Override, which is run by Zoe Quinn.
She's still getting money?
I think she is, yes. Actually, let me look up.
To do nothing?
Zoe is I believe Zoe Quinn is actually still on, I think it was Patreon. I'm going to look. And yeah, paid for existing. Pretty sure she still does. Zoe Quinn is creating art. Yeah, she gets paid almost $2,500 a month for existing through Patreon. So,
not that much money to live off of.
It's not a ton.
But it's still for doing nothing.
Yeah, I mean, I'll take $2,500 for doing nothing. I don't get that much working at Honey Badger Radio. So, okay, so that's pretty much that. And then there's one last thing I wanted to talk about a little bit. Brand new stuff. I want to get your thoughts. It's actually kind of interesting that this is coming up because there are very few people that I've actually made artwork for, and even fewer that I did so completely because I wanted to do it. And two of those people are Lauren Southern and you. So it's funny that this is coming up because I wanted to draw Lauren's what are those things called? Those little prickly animals. She has a hedgehog, right? Yes, her hedgehog. And so I made a little portrait, and then I made you one with a cat. And then we did some other stuff with horses later, but I
asked you for the horse one.
You did ask me for the horse one, and I'm glad that you did. I had fun making it, and I hope you like it.
I do. I still haven't hung it up. It's because it's big and my walls are tough, but it's ready to go. It's wrapped. It's sitting on the side of the wall.
Well, when you say tough, you mean like, well, is it all wood or do you have brick or
like
what?
Concrete in there? So I need a special thing, and this is gonna, require quite a bit because I ended up ordering it on one of those canvas makers in the biggest size it could possibly be. It's like 40 inches wide now.
Wow.
I wanted it to be massive.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. Is it a loft? Is that why? Are you staying in like one of those?
No, I'm in a condo. It's an old brick building, but it used to be military barracks. So there's or officer housing or something, but it's like concrete in between. So it makes hanging things on certain walls very difficult.
Well, it sounds really nice. I mean, it sounds like you have a nice place.
I love it.
So what's going on with Lauren is essentially because she's been working a lot with a group called Defend Europe, and Patreon shut down her Patreon account.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason they gave, according to Patreon, is raising funds in order to take part. It's because she was supposedly raising funds in order to take part in activities that are likely to cause loss of life. And that sounded, that sounds pretty serious. And I can't really verify exactly what Lauren is doing down there because I only get what she shows us, which looks innocent enough, and she's essentially claiming that she's just trying to report on what's happening, and that's actually what her group, Save Europe, I believe is called, is also doing. But I actually had a conversation with Allison about this, and I think the reason why I take issue with this Patreon thing is not because I think that Lauren Southern is completely innocent. I honestly don't know. All right. I don't see any reason to believe that she's guilty because she doesn't really have a history of doing that. She tends to avoid conflict. She definitely goes into areas that are fraught with conflict. Like she's been to lots of Antifa protests and stuff. But I've never seen her starting fights with people that are physical. I've seen her trolling feminists and stuff like that in at slut walks. But I've never seen her go and actually fight against Antifa. So I've never seen that. However, who's to say, right? And Allison and I talked about it, and she basically made the case that it's quite possible that if she was running Patreon, she would be concerned for what Lauren is doing because it could result in unintended casualties, considering it's all dealing with boats and stuff, and there are these migrants that are going back and forth, and I guess this is what they're involved with. And I could see that. I said, well, yeah, I could see that. I think that that's true. However, and this is what I think, and I'll let you give me your thoughts. Patreon, other people that are on Patreon are groups like It's Going Down, and Antifa themselves have a Patreon page, right? And those are up and running. And this is the thing, those two groups and groups like them, which there could be more on Patreon. I didn't look into it a whole lot. I tried to find BAM, which is BAMN. I think it's By Any Means Necessary. Fortunately, they're not up there because that would have just blown my top. That group is crazy. But they're on there, and they have caused millions of dollars in property damage. They've assaulted people and police. They even stabbed a police horse, right? And
there's actual documented evidence of them being violent and hurting people, and yet. Yeah, I mean, I don't like double standards. I can't really speak to what Lauren is doing it now. So I don't really want to sit there and say, oh no, she should be allowed to, her group is fine because I just don't know. It seems to be an anti-illegal immigrant group.
Yeah, I think they're what's the word? Identitarian, definitely Eurocentric identitarian group. So I can't really speak to it, so I don't really want to speak to the merits of the group. But if that's a group that's going to be likely to cause harm to someone based basically on the views that they express rather than their actual documented behavior, then it kind of, Patreon should be, at least have some sort of test or consistency is the word I'm looking for. If there's groups that actually have videos of them beating people, maybe that's an actual documented evidence of the danger caused directly by the group, that maybe they should have their funding pulled too, or both allowed to fundraise and just be like, if you want whatever group you want to go to. Exactly.
If you want to give money to a horrible group, give money to a horrible group, whether they're on the left or the right or whatever. Just maybe just have all of it, but it's just consistency is all that I really care about. And what makes a lot of people mad is that they might, a lot of people that, aren't fans of Trump. Yeah. And didn't really support him in the primaries or even the election, a part of them is kind of like, you know what? I don't really like a lot of things about him, but the media attacking him makes me want to defend him. Yeah. Because the media is just going so crazy. And so there's some of that's just kind of like, when there's no consistency, you kind of want to defend the person that's being singled out when you don't see why they're being singled out, why they're any different than some other group, if they are even similar.
Yeah, it's like a
Right.
call for.
I just don't know enough, but I pretty, as you said, Lauren doesn't go into groups and try to beat people with bike locks. You
Right,
know, I mean,
exactly. That guy,
never heard of that.
I meant to follow up on that, but that guy, I think that guy went into a coma. Remember the one? Or definitely put a man in a coma. It might be the guy that got hit with the bike lock. And yeah, I mean that's my whole point too. It's like, okay, Patreon is a private company. You can do whatever you want, obviously. However, if you're not measuring the kinds of pages that you will be willing to shut down or leave open in some objective fashion, the problem is people will see that and they will respond. People are not stupid. So if you tell them Lauren Southern is, putting people at risk, and they also shut down the other two guys, by the way, Martin Sellner and Patrick Lenart, I think is his name. They basically are the guys that they lead Defend Europe, and they also had Patreon pages, and they removed them. Lauren Southern supposedly only, she's just a journalist. So, but if you're going to remove those and you're going to leave up, Antifa and It's Going Down, it doesn't look good. That's my main thing. It doesn't look good. Do what you want, but don't claim that the reason why you're doing it is because you care about people's safety, because it doesn't hold up when you look at, what you're allowing. By the way, some other stuff that these groups have done, I thought I would share. So not only I thought stabbing a police horse was crazy. I mean, unless it's like a cis-normative, heteronormative, white supremacist horse, I didn't know about.
I mean, obviously,
but,
you know me with my horses.
Yeah,
so that
I know.
One really stuck to me. I mean, like, I definitely care when they're beating people with bike locks, but like, even you go after an animal that like, he's not. The horse didn't choose to be there at all.
Exactly.
And it's not through their career choice or anything. Like they didn't ask for any of this.
Right.
And they're an animal, so they don't have opinions on these things that we know of.
They should have probably gotten the horse's opinion on stuff. Maybe he had to take the job. I mean, but not only that, but they've poured concrete on public transportation train tracks. So that could get hundreds of people killed. They have cut in. I don't remember where they did the train tracks thing, but it was in a city in the States. They cut off phone and fiber optic lines in San Francisco in an effort to remove the ability to make 911 calls. Now it's because they're anti-police, but the problem is if someone needed to call an ambulance or a hospital, they weren't able to. And they also, in Baltimore, in a response to gentrification, there was a building that was being built, and there was by this one company that they think supported gentrification or was enforcing it, which is essentially a more localized complaint that is related to colonialism. But anyway, their response was they essentially slashed tires on a truck and set it on fire. They committed arson. So all these things are very dangerous. I mean, the concrete on train tracks thing just blew my fucking mind. And but these pages are still Patreon doesn't have them down. And an engineer that works at Patreon is actually an active Antifa supporter that actually wants to see active resistance under the Trump regime. So I think that what I'm getting from this is. It's hard to confirm, so I'm going to leave this as my impression is, but it certainly looks this way. Patreon has an ideological bias that is clouding their business choices, and it could hurt them. So I would think that somebody's going to have to step up and make some competitor. So.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of funding sources out there. I worry what happens if it's a free-for-all funding, if Patreon is known and then another place comes up and, it just... I know that any group that would leave because for any reason, because if one group gets through and they're like dedicated Nazis and they're raising money, then like everybody that's on the site is going to it's the Nazi money site. You just know that's exactly how it's going to go down if someone creates a competitor.
Well, it's funny that you should say that because there are a couple of sites that have started competitors that are like, affiliated with kind of identitarian, white nationalist groups and stuff like that. Like there's one called Hatreon, I think. And I'm like, I'm looking for a competitor, but I'm not trying to throw my hat in with,
Wait, Patreon's
groups.
a real thing?
Yeah.
We were making jokes about it on another podcast I was on just the other week. We were making jokes about starting something called Patreon,
No.
where one of the guys wanted to start it, and it would basically be a place where you would pay someone you didn't like not to tweet for so much time or not to write or anything, and that
Patreon,
that it would be funny. But if Patreon actually exists,
yeah,
oh my god,
Patreon is real. It's brand new. It's actually Patreon.us. So if you want to look it up, go ahead.
Right
yeah, you can go ahead. But all that's
and
there.
now this is going to be on my Google thing.
Yeah,
oh wait, you got to request an invite.
Yeah, you got to request you got to request to join. So it's not like solid or whatever. But there are other things that are sort of like trying to compete. Unfortunately, though, they're coming from an ideological perspective, and that's the thing I'm trying to freaking avoid. I just want a non, political, like funding, subscription-based platform. And I mean, we're still using Patreon for now. But if
no, I would like that. At the same time, I feel like there would have to be some limit to, are you raising money to commit a crime, right? And so I think like if that's kind of your base, that's like the only thing that you would like deny is like, you can't raise money so you can hire a hitman for your husband. You can't raise money so you can buy burglary tools. You can't raise money so you can go, whatever, get the gasoline for a fire. Like things like that. And then that would actually bring me back to the Antifa, is that they're not raising the money for that, right? Like that's what they do when they go to a place. But are they specifically saying, let's raise money so we can all buy bike locks? I mean, it's the travel to somewhere. And so then it gets murky and it gets difficult. But I mean, even if you're like, no, as long as it's just, again, though, I go back to censoring. So just making sure that people are treated equally. Like if this is going to hurt someone, then that's going to hurt someone, and not, oh, we just don't agree with what you're doing, therefore it's going to be cut out, but not this person, because even though it hurts people, we're totally cool with the people it's hurting.
Yeah. All right. I don't know if you have any other thoughts on, I guess, if you have any other thoughts on this Patreon Lauren Southern business. Otherwise, no. Well, I'm glad that you actually had some things to say. It looks like it's a growing story, but I think it's less about Lauren than it is about Patreon itself. I think that's where my interest is at. Like, I almost want to see what else they're allowing as far as pages and what else they're taking out, to see like where, if there's a pattern or anything. That would be something that maybe some brave and attractive journalist could maybe go down and pursue at some point. I don't know.
Brave doesn't get me, but once you throw in attractive, then it's like, okay, well, maybe I need to look into this.
Okay. Well, thank you, Ashe. I guess we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. So I want to thank you for coming on the show and talking to me about these issues. I think they're super important. I'm actually really excited for the future of what could be a change in the way colleges treat sexual assault. Nice. Yeah. So
I can start reporting on like, this policy has been revised and there's due process.
Yay. And now I can talk about actual, like real rape cases that have real shit going on.
It's going to take years and years before any of this changes, because there's already colleges that are fearful that the Dear Colleague letter will go away, and have already come out and said that like, we're just going to keep acting as if it's there. Our policies match that, and that's how we're going to act. You've got certain states trying to codify into law the 2011 Dear Colleague letter. So you're going to have to deal with that. It's going to be a state fight. It's going to still happen. And these colleges, despite having these due process concerns, are still going to probably have a really hard time actually implementing them and following them. And it's going to be years and years until it actually gets sorted out. And while even if that's happening, you're still dealing with the identity politics, social justice warrior that's still going strong that colleges are just too afraid to really deal with. So, you know, it's just going to be so long. Like, this issue isn't going away anytime soon. I have no fears about my career and what I would write about in the near future. Maybe 20 years from now, I feel like I'm still going to be writing about some of this stuff.
Oh,
it's
yeah,
be something different.
for sure. Yeah, for sure. This is definitely not going to turn over overnight. You're not just changing the laws. You also have to change the culture around it and the way that people are educated and all that. So, but thanks for joining us on the Fireside Chat, Ashe. Thank you guys for joining us in the chat. And we will talk to you guys next week with another exciting guest.
Bye.
All right. We're out. Thank you, Ashe. You need to take off.